I'm Julia Turner, and this is the Slate Culture Gabfest, the Daddygang Rage Virus edition. It's Wednesday, June 25th, 2025, and on today's show, we're talking about 28 Years Later, the zombie sequel from Danny Boyle and Alex Garland that depicts a small zombie-free community on the British Isles that's turned both inward and backward. We'll ask, why zombies again? And what's this movie doing with the form? Then, Daddygang, it's time finally for us to marvel at the phenomenon who is Alex Cooper, the podcaster and entrepreneur behind the massively successful Call Her Daddy podcast. And we'll do that by examining Call Her Alex, a new 2-part Hulu documentary about her and, perhaps importantly, from her production company. And then the Haim girls have a new album called I Quit, in which they give up on relationships, but not on making fun songs. We'll give a listen. We've got the gang all here today. Hi, Dana.
Hello.
How are you?
Happy for the three of us to be back. Yeah.
Indeed. And hello, Stephen.
I mean, my head jerked back when someone described themselves as happy. I'm so happy.
Well, happy for a specific circumstance.
No, fair enough. But I am happy that someone is happy. I mean, like, I now myself am happy. It's infectious.
Steve, I just throw open the window every morning and sing with the bluebirds.
And in comes 102-degree zephyrs.
I like the idea of Dana in sort of a Snow White dress with trussing and little swallows fluttering onto her fingertips. All right. From that delightful image, shall we dive in?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Savor every last drop of summer with Starbucks. From bold refreshers to rich cold brews, the sunniest season only gets better with a handcrafted iced beverage in your hand. Available for a limited time. Your summer favorites are ready at Starbucks.
5 a.m. I'm up with a crisp Celsius energy drink. Running 12 miles today. Grab a green juice, quick change, and head to work. Meetings, workshops. One more Celsius, no slowing down. Working late, but obviously still meeting the girls for a little dancing. Celsius. Live, fit, go. Grab a cold, refreshing Celsius at your local retailer or locate now at Celsius.com.
28 Years Later is, of course, the sequel out not quite 28 years later to 28 Days Later, the zombie film also made by director Danny Boyle and written by Alex Garland, that introduced us to fast-moving zombies and was an arresting horror movie from the early aughts. 28 Years Later is the third in the sequence, although it's maybe going to kick off a new trilogy. And it introduces us to a British Isles that is quarantined from the rest of the world, which has remained zombie-free. And we find ourselves in a small, isolated community separated from the mainland by a causeway where people live an old-fashioned British life, and occasionally young men and their fathers go onto the mainland to practice killing the zombies who have evolved into multiple forms, including bloated, ground-crawling, worm-eating ones and fast-moving ones who include a new form, the Alpha. Our hero is a 12-year-old boy named Spike, played by Alfie Williams. The film opens as we meet him heading off the island for the first time. His father is Aaron Taylor Johnson, charismatic, confident, and a little bit frightening. His mother is Jodie Comer, who is suffering from a mysterious ailment that troubles Spike and causes him to set off on an adventure. Before we dive in, let's listen to a clip. This is from the trailer rather than the film, but we'll give you a sense of the tenor.
There are many kinds of death, and some are better than others. Infected, non-infected alike.
That's why our home is so precious.
Once you walk onto that mainland, there's no rescues.
All right. Well, Dana, we'll start with you. This movie had a successful opening weekend. I think the strongest opening for a Danny Boyle picture ever. What did you make of this kid's eye view of Zombieland?
I mean, first of all, I feel the need to forestall various Reddit objectors by saying that, strictly speaking, they're not zombies. I mean, it's perfectly correct to call this a zombie movie. It's very much in that tradition and consciously quoting from it. But I get the impression, and I think this may become important in the future lore of the universe, that they're called the infected, right? Not zombies, by the uninfected characters in the movies. And they seem to not have died and come back to life. It is more virus-like, which I think might be relevant in terms of this, among other things, being kind of a COVID allegory, this movie. But yeah, okay, that's just to keep the actually sayers from pointing out that these are the infected and not the
So
zombies.
I will say the father says to the son in convincing him that killing them is an immoral act, that they are mindless. So in that
Right.
sense, they are zombie-like, according to the father.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the question of whether to have sympathy for any of them or not
Yes.
actually comes up several times in the movie. But anyway, this is not a huge point that they're not zombies, because this is very much a movie that is quoting the zombie tradition from at least George Romero onward. And I really liked it. I mean, you have to like gross out movies. I would not say this is a particularly terrifying movie in terms of actual jump scares and making your heart race in a something's going to jump out of the closet sort of way. But it's very tense. It's got a lot of gore, a lot of guts. It's deliberately trying, and sometimes comically trying, the way horror movies often do, to make you laugh at just exactly how far it's willing to go and what it's willing to show you. But ultimately, it is also a movie with a very humanist message. I don't want to spoil what happens in the last third of the movie, because for one thing, it sets up what's going to happen in the next two of these movies that are already planned. I think the first one of them is already shot. But also, it's sort of that's where the moral meaning of the movie unfolds itself, and I think it's the best part of the movie. Some critics have objected that this movie is too kind of muddled and scattered and doing too many things at once, and that may be a very legitimate complaint. But I was riveted at every individual moment. I thought all the main performances, especially the kid, quite surprisingly. I mean, acting opposite Ralph Fiennes and Jodie Comer when you're 14 years old is not an easy task, but I thought Alfie Williams was great and really carries the movie as a very young protagonist. Yeah, we can talk about the technical aspects and stuff, but it's got really cool looking kills and gore. And so if that's something you're not into, you're not going to enjoy this movie. But then it goes somewhere so beautiful and mysterious at the end that I really don't want to spoil too much, but it has to do with Ralph Fiennes, who is just wonderful in his role. Steve, what about you? What do you think?
I loved the movie. I just really like Danny Boyle for so many different reasons and so many different movies. I loved the original. I thought this just honored it completely while moving it in new and totally interesting directions. I'm all in on a sequel and a trilogy. At first, I thought the skittish style, which is spiky, punky, frightening, and highly distinctive, kind of worked thematically, right? And mood setting wise, but I was worried it was going to get overly distracting. But he allows the movie to take a breath and relax. And as you say, completely humanize. It gives you an extraordinary world up front of a kind of medievalized but contemporary or slightly futuristic England where technology is absent and a kind of communitarian small world vibe or whatever has taken over, ethos has taken over completely. And the little signs about like, don't take only what you need. I mean, it's a scarcity, it's a legitimate scarcity community that's also
pre-industrial, right?
Totally pre-industrial. And I thought that was wonderful. Like that setup was wonderful. The triangle of the family with the kid and the two parents is set up incredibly well. And then which I won't give away, the real premise of the movie. He's brought you along to it. I knew nothing about the film other than what everyone knew. And when you realize that's the MacGuffin of this film, I was in already, but I was really, really hooked. Comer's absolutely tremendous in this movie. She goes from debilitatingly infirm to having a mama bear moment that is just like out of your seat. Like that was so beautifully realized. The kid is wonderful. There's a comic relief of this Swede who appears sort of out of nowhere, is incredibly funny. The entire theater was rocking with laughter at a couple of those moments. I was really taken with this. But Julia, I know that you are not a big fan of the jump scare. What did you think of this?
Yeah, as our regular listeners know, I don't like horror movies very much. I'm more comfortable with like horror action movies, like the Quiet Place movies, or I did not dread seeing this. It's funny. I found a lot of the movie unpleasantly tense to watch. I explained to my husband when I told him this is what we were going to go see on our date night, that Dana, it was your enthusiasm for the film that made us do it. And at one point early on, when like the kid is in peril in the forest with his dad, and my heart was in my throat, I just turned to him and was like, "I'm going to kill Dana." But in the end, I actually think this is a really beautiful movie, and in the manner of filmmakers using IP and gimmicks and shtick to tell interesting stories. What I love about it is that it's a a I mean, a coming of age movie makes it sound pat and treacly, but it's so rooted in the perspective of this 12-year-old kid whose parents are trying to protect him in different ways. And it's really a movie about fear, right? Like this community that is embedded in fear and safety, right? Like if you follow the rules and you observe the principles, you might be able to keep this community safe. But what the film begins to explore is like what caution costs you, what living a life animated by fear costs you. And it's this story about a kid starting to question the rules that he's being brought up in and starting to grow more comfortable with both risk and the potential consequences of taking those risks. And that it was actually quite interestingly just about growing up, like growing up in a big, scary world full of scariness, which is certainly resonant for our moment on a number of fronts. And I, despite disliking the experience of watching it and how scared I was for much of it, came away really admiring the film and what it was up to.
Yeah, it's the rare movie of this kind, like an action-based horror movie that ends on its most contemplative note. Well, maybe not the very ending, because then there's like that funny action kicker, which we won't spoil. But that last act that I'm talking about, it needs the rest of the movie in order to have the sense of quiet that it does, right? Because of the contrast between that quiet and all the action that's gone before. And it was just such an unexpected swerve that even if it is a little bit of a jumble, I just admired Boyle's ambition. And I do want to mention also just the visual ambition of the movie and the fact that Danny Boyle, at this stage in his career when he can do anything, has not settled into, like, one thing you can't say about this movie, love it or hate it, it's not some sort of lazy borrowing on the previous two installments, the second of which had nothing to do with Boyle, or I guess he produced it but did not direct it. It's not going back and tapping into that IP or those characters or even those themes. And I mean, zombie movies are sort of famous for this, but it feels of the moment, right? It feels like it's about current things. Most obviously, Brexit. I mean, it obviously is a Brexit allegory. Even in the moment, as you mentioned, Steve, there's this Swedish soldier who gets washed up because of a shipwreck. So he ends up on the quarantined, taboo British Isles that the rest of Europe will not touch. And you realize that the rest of Europe has moved on. He has a cell phone, right? He's a guy of the 21st century. And that intrusion of Europe into the movie, plus the fact that at the beginning, and we didn't mention this, there's this very odd stylistic choice that a bunch of clips from, for example, Laurence Olivier's Henry V movie, the Shakespeare adaptation, and Rudyard Kipling's poem Boots, this famous poem about the Boer War that's being read by an actor, I think, about the First World War. Anyway, there's this sort of tribute to kind of British heroism that you can't tell how tongue-in-cheek it is. Yeah. It's a very fascinating way to kick off the movie. And I think for British viewers, it would probably mean a lot more and something entirely different.
Super resonant. And I was really interested, Dana, to have a coming-of-age movie about with maturity in a very existential sense at its heart in a zombie movie, because what's the appeal of zombies, right? They're the ultimate NPCs, right? They don't have consciousness. Killing them, I think some of the trendiness of zombies arises out of the popularity of first-person shooter games, and they're like the guilt-free kill. They're about reveling in death as a diversion or an entertainment activity without thinking about what death actually is. And this movie's like, no. It's not that kind of zombie movie. It's a really daring, interesting choice.
I love how the kind of collage techniques add to the sense of tension and stress and fear and sort of how men have to hype themselves up to confront fear. and the kind of British lineage of that. And, there's also been much coverage of the shooting techniques, which they used a lot of iPhones in this, including one rig with, between 10 and 20 iPhones that would shoot some of the action set pieces from a gajillion angles at once. I guess by a gajillion, I mean 10 to 20, depending on the number of iPhones in the rig, but which allows them to kind of create herky-jerky editing techniques in some of the violent moments that make the film look arresting, while being kind of a DIY way to achieve some effects that have been successful elsewhere. I felt slightly annoyed by how much of the movie has a kind of framing piece that is a setup for the second movie in this trilogy that is the follow-up to the two first films. So I don't know what you call that. There's a framing piece where we spend some time with some other characters who seem to tease us for where the trilogy will go. And while on the one hand, those characters seem compelling, on the other hand, I'm just sick of movies that are pretending to be episodes. So that was one grace note that I had. But I would send people to this, and I'm excited for that next film. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
Maximally, all in.
Yeah, completely ready for the next film, which, by the way, I think has already been filmed, probably because they wanted to film it while Alfie Williams was still around the same age, which is directed by Nia DaCosta, who directed the Candyman remake that came out recently. And that, I think, is going to be out in January of 2026.
All right, well, the film is 28 years later. I think we all would recommend it. And in fact, we remain so interested in it that we are going to do a spoiler special for our bonus segment for Slate Plus listeners today and dive a little bit more into the mysteries and marvels of the end of this film.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game, shifting a little money here, a little there, just hoping it all works out? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can be a better budgeter and potentially lower your insurance bill, too. You tell Progressive what you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll help you find options within your budget. Try it today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
All right. Well, now is the time in the podcast when we discuss business. We have a couple of items. The first is that we are going to enforce that June 30th deadline for strut submissions only because we have this extraordinary treasury already of offerings from our listeners. We do want more, but we're going to have to close it on the 30th. Limit yourself to 3, and we look forward to going through them. It's just a highlight. I find 100 songs that I add to my rotation. So send those to our email address, which is culturefest@slate.com, and make sure that you put Strut 2025 or Strut 25 in the subject heading, so it just makes it searchable for us and easy to compile. The only other item of business is, as usual, the Slate Plus bonus episode available to Slate Plus members and their feeds. Today, the three of us will be talking about, we decided to do a spoiler. The truth is that 28 years later has all kinds of things that you wouldn't want to necessarily know going in seeing it, but you'd want to hear discussed and want to discuss yourself having seen it. So we're going to do a spoiler. If you're not a Slate Plus member, I wish that I could just sit you down face to face and explain how lifebloody the Plus memberships are to what we do. They keep us going. They keep the lights on. You wouldn't want us doing this in the dark without electricity. It'd be much harder to get it in your ears if that were the case. As a member, you get ad-free podcasts, lots of bonus content like the Slate Plus segment that I just mentioned, and you get to hear members-only programming on other great Slate shows like Slow Burn or Political Gabfest. Members get unlimited access to all the great writing at Slate. You never hit a paywall if you're a Slate Plus member. I should also mention that you'll be supporting our work and the work of our brilliant colleagues. No joke. It really does help us make this show. These memberships are super important, so please sign up today at slate.com/culture+. Again, that's slate.com/culture+. Or subscribe now on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page.
All right. Call her Alex is a new 2-part documentary airing on Hulu that stars Alex Cooper, the podcasting phenomenon behind the Call Her Daddy podcast, which started with a partner, her roommate on Barstool Sports, later was parlayed into a multi-million-dollar deal with Spotify once Alex Cooper went solo. Later, that deal turned into a $100 million plus deal with Sirius, as Cooper has become a bigger and bigger force in media, the most popular podcast fronted by and produced by a woman. And of course, one of the podcasts with whom Vice President Kamala Harris chose to sit down last summer during the podcast blitz phase of the campaign. We've wanted to check out this documentary both because we're curious about this star-produced documentary. Alex Cooper's Unwell Media is one of the producers of the film, which is a trend, of course, that we've been following with projects like the Beckham film and the Beyonce movie and the rest. But also as an occasion to take a broader look at the Cooper phenomenon. So we'll do a little bit of both today, but I think we should start more narrowly with the film. It follows Cooper as she's setting out to go on her first live tour, a 7-city live tour, and she's figuring out what a live tour version of the Call Her Daddy podcast should be. It includes kind of Chippendale dancers, which is not something that we have considered in our live tours to date, but we can talk about that for the show if we need to. But
I'm ready. Just say I've been waiting for you to ask. I actually, every live show I wear pull away clothes, pop away clothes, like an NBA player. Like if you so much as hinted, boom.
I rescind my hint.
Come with a stack of Benjis. That's all I'm saying.
Anyhow, the sort of ostensible drama of the show is, can she pull off this live tour? But then it's beyond that a pretty classic biopic, starting in her childhood and then exploring the evolution of her success and the nature of her appeal. And in this clip, we'll hear her describing her childhood in which she was not, she felt quite dissimilar to her modern persona as a hot blonde who teaches American women how to give the best blowjobs, and in fact is kind of a shy or socially uncomfortable at school out of certain contexts person. Here's a clip of her describing that childhood.
Growing up, I never had a problem making friends with girls.
Mondays, I hate Mondays. Mondays.
Whether it was on my soccer team or at school. But I was so scared of boys because of the way they treated me. I had a lot of comments of like, you look like a skeleton. Boys coming up to me being like, oh my gosh, her legs are so frail. Always making comments about my body and my hair. I'm naturally a redhead, so kids would say, you're a ginger, you don't have a soul, fire crotch, you're disgusting, no one wants to touch you. And I hated myself.
Dana, I'm going to start with you, in part because Call Her Daddy very consciously cultivates the notion of a female audience and Alex Cooper being a girl's girl who makes content for girls that maybe boys sometimes like to listen to, given her download numbers. What did you make of the doc as a presentation of her public persona?
This was such an interesting topic to prepare because I found her, not especially her, but her appeal and the breadth of appeal of this podcast such a slippery thing to get my hands on. So even after watching this 2-hour-long documentary about her and listening to 4 complete episodes of her podcast, which is a lot of listening because they're long episodes, and dipping into some other ones. Anyway, I probably spent 7 hours absorbing content about and by Alex Cooper just in order to talk about her for 10 minutes. And I still don't quite understand why this podcast is such a gigantic phenomenon. I'm really curious how many of our listeners overlap with its listeners. I was laughing throughout the doc, realizing that the day her podcast drops every week is Wednesday, which is the day ours does, and wondering, how many people are out there downloading them both. But even to call this a podcast, what she does, the Call Her Daddy phenomenon, at this point, and for quite a while now, has not really been an accurate word for what it is. It's a talk show, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, for one thing, it has a visual component that's quite highly produced. It's not even like Conan O'Brien's podcast where, a few pasty people are sitting around a badly lit room having a conversation and you could just as well tune out. It is, filmed on nice, posh, cozy sets and kind of expensively produced. And I think most of its listeners or viewers probably watch it as much as they listen to it. So she seems to be more analogous to somebody like a daytime talk show host, like an Oprah Winfrey figure or something like that, in terms of what the media empire experience is like for its fans, right? So that's one thing to set out there. She and other people who are doing these fancy visual podcasts are really taking podcasting into a different place. But why in particular has this woman been so successful at what she does? From what I've heard of her podcast, and I've now heard 4 complete episodes, it's not that she's a great interviewer in terms of certainly not asking pointed questions. You could argue that her questions are a little too puffy and a little flattering. Not in terms of, necessarily making people tell stories they've never told before, that they might get a little bit raunchier or more personal. But at the same time, once she gets somebody comfortable, you really do get to know who that person is. And I had to admit that. One of the complete episodes I listened to was the Simone Biles interview.
Immediately when you get off the mat, what do?
I go to tell my coach, and I said, I'm done. I'm not doing anymore. Because if I survive that, I don't know how much else I can survive. Like, I always say I'm a cat with 9 lives, but I think that was my 9th. I'm done. And she's like,
and I really recommend it as a starter, Alex Cooper, if you've never listened to a Call Her Daddy, because first of all, Simone Biles is fascinating. I'm as interested in her as a person as a gymnast. I absolutely love that moment when she, stepped down from the routine she was about to do and just sort of acknowledged that she quit in this kind of glorious and triumphant way. I think we talked about that on the podcast at the time. And that's one of the big things that Alex Cooper wants to talk to her about. They're also both athletes. Alex Cooper, of course, was not Olympic level, but she did get a full ride to Boston University on a soccer scholarship, and I think was a very high-level college soccer player, kind of one of the stars of her team. So she kind of relates athlete to Simone Biles, and she gets her so comfortable. So in a way, that flattery gets the person cozy enough that they'll open up, almost in the way that inside the actor's studio, right? Even though everybody made fun of James Lipton for being so sycophantic and Will Ferrell impersonated him and all that, I loved to watch that show because actors were comfortable on it, and so they told good stories. I still feel there's something slippery. Like, there's a part of me that thinks, is it just that she's so hot and she's this lissom, willowy blonde, who talks about sex? And certainly the podcast took off in part, I think, because she was a hot young girl who talked about sex. But it's gone in a much more therapeutic kind of direction now. But why? Why is the Daddygang, as she calls her fans out there, so rabidly in love with this podcast that literally she sold out Madison Square Garden to do a live show?
Steve, what did you make of this podcast? Did it provide you with answers to Dana's questions?
Well, I knew almost nothing about her other than she was huge. That maybe even there are some weeks where she out-downloads Joe Rogan, which is extraordinary, and that there is a kind of, gendered, they're jockeying for 1 and 2, Rogan and Cooper, and there is a kind of obviously like massively gendered divide there. I thought the documentary was really genuinely fascinating, actually. I didn't think it was going to be, and that there's something antithetical about both her and the podcast to my entire worldview and sensibility. By the end, I was, funnily enough, kind of won over, and I have some tentative insights into why this particular person. There are 2 or 3 really big points of interest to me in the documentary. The first is that she was a genuinely unpopular middle schooler with boys, in the sense that when popularity goes from having tight same gender friends to being a competition for a different kind of attention, like, she lost that competition, and the archival footage really emphasizes that. That doesn't seem like a bullshit, synthetically generated backstory. She was awkward looking, and there was this phenomenal contrast, which is that at home she was in a very safe, very loving, supportive environment in which she was seen for who she was. And she made these videos, endlessly made these videos where she's the play host, pretend host with her siblings and really close friends, one of whom is one friend who's accompanied her now into the gigantic career. Those are, as a father of a daughter who did exactly that, would disappear with an iPhone. To this day, I find videos on my iPhone by my younger daughter that were made between the ages of 4 and 18 that I'd never seen before, that were sort of deposited there like little Easter eggs, and they're very similar. I mean, so there was this dialectic between a person who really knew what it was like to lose out in the market for popularity at school, who was nonetheless an entirely beloved, emotionally safe, and seen child at home. And I think that's an unusual combination, and that comes out in everything she's done since. Secondly, I would say her mother is a therapist and a remarkably like steady, thoughtful, introspective, self-presenting parent. And her grandmother, it comes out, was a real feminist. That the speculation on the part of the mother is, no, in fact, my mother would not be horrified by what her granddaughter is doing at all. And you sense this, then you really see a lineage of tough, no-nonsense women for whom both sex and the inner life are equally real and not to be shrunk from. And there is a way in which this person is a fruiting of that lineage, and to that extent, it's inspiring. And the other thing I would say is that, consequently, she seems to have an extraordinarily healthy, what turns out to be marriage. It's her boyfriend who becomes her husband in the course of the documentary. The question I would throw to the group, which isn't mine to answer, is like, what wave of feminism are you, and how you react to her, I think might determine how you react to her. Are you the wave by which this person she sort of turned herself from a nerd into this hotsy-trotsy Barbie. Is that empowering or disempowering? Like, I don't know exactly, but there's a legion of women who find it empowering. So, who am I to say? But I was amazed, Julia, by the end of this. I had a really sincere respect for this person while having no affinity for what she does. Respect, but no personal affinity. I wouldn't listen to it.
I mean, you come away with a great admiration, or at least I came away with a great admiration for her work ethic and her canniness and her creativity. What I wish, though, I felt like the documentary checked in at various points along her growth curve as she's done that trajectory and been quite strategic and sort of realized there's probably a ceiling on being the sex tip girl, and that she wanted to have a broader empowerment empire. I felt like the doc, I feel like the celebrities are getting cannier at making the documentaries they produce about themselves have some patina of journalism and self-reflection and self-awareness. And I felt like this doc was actually much less evolved than the rest of her media empire on that front. Like, how did she get from being the girl who was afraid of boys to the girl who was so confident sexually that she was giving sex tips? Like, was she faking it? Where did she gain the confidence? Like, what? And perhaps, I listened to a ton of her show, but not enough episodes to, perhaps she's described that all ad nauseum to her listeners, and that's why they didn't go into it. But, did she find it limiting, frustrating? She kind of has to embrace, like, no, that's what made me, and then I wanted more. But, being the sort of TNA on the Barstool Network is part of how she came up. And I imagine there were more complex feelings about that. I do also have to say that journalistically, it's not journalism, but she accuses her soccer coach at BU of sexual harassment and describes how she made an accusation of that during her college term, which resulted in her leaving the soccer team and leaving college. And because of how BU handled it.
My parents and I sit down with the dean of athletics, and my mom and dad say, our daughter has been getting sexually harassed by Nancy Feldman for the past 3 years on this campus. And from freshman year to
she just
day,
by name says this coach and makes accusations without, there's no response from the university, there's no response from the coach. She's very credible in her account of what happens, and I'm not here casting doubt on what happened to her, but since the doc has come out, the coach has not commented, BU has denied mishandling it, and a number of other people who played for that coach, nearly 100 players, signed a statement vouching for that coach's character, which just all, it's like better to ask all those questions and put all those things in your statement, and say, well, they say this, but here's who else is with me. She sort of throws some bombs in the doc without doing the work that an independent documentarian might do. What did you guys make of that part of the film?
Yeah, that startled me too, that the coach was both shown and named right? But that there wasn't any kind of there wasn't even any acknowledgement of we reached out to them and they didn't call back or something like that. So it made you wonder what kind of legal footwork was done in advance. It surely can't be the case that they just dropped this documentary on Hulu, letting the coach figure it out that way. So some lawyers were talking in some rooms, and it does seem like we, the viewers, would be entitled to know at least what the other side was saying. Another moment that struck me as just kind of dishonest in the documentary, or almost unintentionally revealing, was the moment when her tour producer threatens to leave. Do you remember that? There's a lot of build up to how tense she is and how nervous she is about her first live tour in 2023. And then there's this big dramatic scene that's never really explained where the guy we've sort of only seen, in the background basically, but the guy who's producing the entire tour, who is in charge of, where do the cameras go and who comes on stage next, decides that he's going to quit 24 hours before the first show.
He's the person that literally is running this entire tour. He's has the mic on, lighting cue go, dancers go, Alex go, mic go, turn on, turn off, like every fucking thing. That this show literally cannot go on tomorrow if this man does not. So this is not what I fucking expected.
And it's entirely framed by the documentary as sort of a crisis for Alex. But it clearly has to mean that man is very unhappy, right? Mm-hmm. He's unhappy with how it's going or how he's been treated, or we don't exactly know what the reason is. And there's a moment with cameras off but audio on where you hear her talking to him and sort of begging him to stay with the tour, and then he does. And then it's never revisited. Like, is he glad he stayed with the tour? Does he get a talking head moment to explain? No. So it seemed to me that what was being elided in that moment had to be either that she had been difficult to work with, or there's something that she says about it's as if nobody on this team has ever produced anything before, and the producer says, yeah, exactly. So were there other kind of incompetent people she was mad at? Like, somebody's furious at somebody if your tour manager is about to quit 24 hours before opening. So that seemed like it should have either not been in there or been more thoroughly explicated.
I mean, it's definitely a puff doc. And I watched a lot of this really ready to hate her, to turn it into a hate watch, and was amazed when I didn't, including that moment. That was like a turning point where I was like, oh, this is going to be good, that they left the audio on. And then he doesn't seem to look, all we know is that he's unwilling to direct his anger toward her. Now, whether that's self-preservative, but he doesn't know that he's being recorded in that moment. And there isn't a fuck you vibe towards her. It does seem to be that there's a level of general production incompetence that he's expected to compensate for as the guy, as the director of the show. And he feels like he can't do that anymore. So I was just really on the fence about that. But no doubt, Julia, this thing is like, it feels as though just soup to nuts control over what we saw.
I mean, I think one of the things that I find most exciting about her career, and I'm like glad to have spent this time in her orbit and know about it a little bit more, is that it's cool to get to watch her grow. Like, I bet she'll make another documentary in 10 years about herself, and it'll be better and it'll be smarter about this stuff. All right. Well, the documentary is Call Her Alex. Her juggernaut show is Call Her Daddy. Her network is the Unwell Network. It will probably be the only media company that exists once various rounds of consolidation and future continue. So may we all enjoy its product for many years to come.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Progressive loves to help people make smart choices. That's why they offer a tool called Auto Quote Explorer that allows you to compare your Progressive car insurance quote with rates from other companies, so you save time on the research and can enjoy savings when you choose the best rate for you. Give it a try after this episode at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
After Zoomies at the dog park, it's time for Drive Up at Target. In goes a big bag of kibble and one squeaky chicken toy for the good boy. Drive Up that's ready when you are. Only in the Target app. Just tap Target.
Haim, I think I first encountered maybe in one of our early summer struts. I believe their song The Wire was probably submitted for one of our very first summer struts way back when. We'll have to ask Chris Melanphy. But they are, of course, the trio of Haim sisters from the San Fernando Valley, and they've been making laid back pop confections for more than a decade now. This latest album comes out of a rare period where all three sisters were not in relationships at the same time. And Danielle, one of the sisters and a producer of their previous albums, had broken up with her longtime partner and producer of the band, Ariel Rechtschied. So the title, I Quit, is thematically echoed in song after song after song. The first song we should listen to before we dive into this album and the evolution of the Haim girlies is probably Relationships, which is the first single off the album and has been tearing through TikTok and your strut submissions for us this summer. Let's start with a clip from Relationships. Tell us what you think of this album. Is it a masterpiece? Is it shambolic? Is it both? Is it something else? What have the Haim girls delivered upon us this time?
Well, let me begin by saying that I was already like off-put, verging on like a quietly simmering rage that I had to stop listening to this record to make this podcast. That I took my AirPods out of my ear canals and Haim was no longer in my head. But that's not quite right. I've been hearing them songs over and over again while you and Dana talk, really. But
while you two yammer on about something or other.
So let me begin by saying I think Women in Music Part 3, their previous album, is absolutely a masterpiece. Like, it's just like the California sound. It's all these rock influences blended in interesting ways and made new. Incredible songcraft, the production value, the musicianship, the harmonies, all of that stuff. I just thought that was an extraordinary album. I mean, this is a new album. I've lived with it now for whatever, several days. Is it as good as that previous album? It's different. I think it's a terrific record, by the way. There are 5 or 6 songs that I immediately connected with. Just to give a quick list, I mean, Relationship is terrific. All Over Me is a really good song. The Farm is a power ballad, terrific. Everybody's trying to figure me out, co-written with Justin Vernon. I mean, that's a spine running through the record of really strong songs. What people have said that I don't disagree with is that the album maybe lacks focus overall and starts out super strong, and I think sustains its strength for most of it, and then does kind of peter out and get a little ill-focused. But that's the age of digital downloads. It just costs you nothing. You're not time constrained. It's not an LP or even a CD. You can put on all kinds of stuff that might not have made it onto a record before. It's 15 cuts. And I'm just dying to know, what you guys think of this record, what you make of them. Like, I have theories as to why I find them so utterly charming. And I will say that unlike a lot of music like this that I love, somewhat surprisingly, this didn't come to me through my daughters. My daughters make withering, relentless fun of me for my love of Haim. Not that they don't like Haim or respect Haim, but they're just like, they just find it weird.
Is it like a cliche to be a middle-aged man who loves Haim? Like, what's the difference between this and the various other, like,
you love Boy Genius with them, right?
Love Boy Genius. They love Boy Genius. I guess there's something, maybe there is a way in which, because their influences are like on this record alone, you just immediately you hear "Can't Always Get You Want" by the Stones. Freedom, they actually sample from George Michael. There's a Springsteen name check, Born to Run name check in the first track. On a Petty, there's like an American Girl riff. There's a dad rock hovers over their influences. And so maybe it is kind of a weird cliche. And actually most of the other stuff I don't know. Anyway, some theory about that, but I'm just dying to know, like what does anyone share this like overwhelming feeling of affection for this music and these sisters on this panel? I'm just dying to know.
My take on them is very colored by my years living in Los Angeles because they are such great citizens in and avatars of this city. Like they're, this dates back to my time at the LA Times running the culture section. Like at one point, they all posed like naked in their living room, covering themselves up with open, print pages of the calendar section, which is the art section of the paper. It's like they're boosters of believers in LA as a place of mystery and cool and creativity and fun. And it's like a funner city because they're in it, loving it and making things in it. So I feel a sort of a Homer fondness for them in addition to just genuinely liking their music. But I also, their influences are off for generation, are off generationally in a way that's funny. Like they do seem to be reaching back a generation before their youth. Like they're nostalgic, but they're nostalgic for stuff that was popular before they were cognizant. They're in their 30s, but they seem nostalgic for the music of my youth and prior in a way that's really interesting. I mean, my favorite song on the album is Down to Be Wrong, which I think is just an absolute barn burner and is kind of a Sheryl Crow homage.
Yes.
It's like not even one of my favorite from my era, but let's listen to a little bit of Down to Be Wrong. I mean, turn it up, right?
Yeah, that is the feeling, that kind of top down. There's several references in lyrics. I think 2 different songs reference driving around with your top down, which is both incredibly LA, but it's very much the feeling of this album, which when we discussed the idea of doing the new Haim album, we said, but somebody's going to submit these songs for Summer Strut, right? And I'm sure they will. This is a very summer vibe kind of album. I mean, I think my critique of it probably would be the same as Carl Wilson's was on Slate, which is just simply that it's almost too undistinguishably pleasant and soft rocky, that I don't feel like there's a lot of ups and downs and spikes in the album. And a lot of the songs, as Carl points out, I don't think I would have noticed this, but he's right, don't have bridges or moments where, that they don't have a build and then a story and then a switchback or something, that they're kind of these pleasant chunks of summery sound that all blend together. And I kind of found that lyrically as well, I guess. I mean, I'm not as much of a Haim listener as the two of you. I think I primarily experienced them through Alana Haim having been in the Paul Thomas Anderson movie Licorice Pizza. I don't sit around and listen to them, although I'm familiar with their hits. By the way, PTA also shot the cover to this album, apparently photographed it as he did the cover to their last album. So they have this and he's made some of their videos. They have this long relationship with him. And of course, he very much gets their Valley vibe. But I was just going to say that lyrically, I was a little bit disappointed that an album that's being advertised as sort of a breakup album for all 3 of them, right? That it found itself made at this moment when all 3 of them had just left long-term relationships. Kind of, it didn't have a whole lot of kind of burning, longing, and passion in the lyrics. It does have this very mellow feel, and maybe this is just the way women of their generation break up with dudes, but the entire breakup emotion seemed to be like, well, bye to you, and on with my independent life without you. I was sort of like, where's the anguish? Where's the longing? I wanted to hear some of the specificity about these kinds of relationships that they were leaving or the loneliness. I was just thinking of, I know, Julia, that you love Liz Phair's album Exile in Guyville, and I was thinking of that great lyric from Liz Phair in one of her many great breakup songs where she says, it's true that I lost your lighter. What is it? It's true that I stole your lighter, and it's also true that I lost the map.
I lost the map. But when you said that I wasn't worth talking to, I had to take your word on that.
It's such a specific breakup song, right? Where you picture like the fight this couple are having on a trip. And I kind of wanted some story songs like that a little bit where you felt, I just feel like there needs to be a little bit more abjection in a good breakup album. And this one was so cool and collected and so like I'm smoking Marlboros with the top down and going on with my life that it was just sort of like, are you really that cool all the time?
Yeah, that's interesting. There's sort of a lack of vulnerability. There's both sensitivity and reflectiveness in it, but maybe a lack of like raw vulnerability that's part of it. I also think structurally, it's true that some of them never they never get they never quite achieve liftoff. Like they keep you in the preamble, which is maybe a problem, but maybe it's actually the point. Like that moment of like, I'm free now is actually a kind of in-betweenness usually. Like when you're still reverberating with the end of the thing you've quit, you aren't actually free yet to achieve liftoff or to get to the next thing or to totally process or synthesize. So maybe the in-betweenness is kind of part of the point. But Dana, did you have a favorite track?
Yeah, I had a couple favorites. I think just because it contrasts to the ones you guys have mentioned, we should listen to a little bit of Take Me Back, which when I saw the title of it, I thought, here comes the abject song of longing that I've been waiting for. But the Take Me Back does not actually mean lyrically, take me back, dude who broke up with me or who I broke up with, right? It means it's a temporal kind of reference, like take me back to the time of my teenage years when I would make out in cars with boys. And it's kind of a nostalgic song about an innocent time of longing. All right, that's a really bouncy song. That could have been a single hit. And I really, really love the sisterly harmonies on that, which as somebody who doesn't have a huge history with Haim, Steve, I want to ask you which album I should listen to get more of that. I mean, we just talked about the Beach Boys last week, right? There's something about the way siblings can harmonize together
Totally
that's just so pleasurable.
I'm so glad you said that. Well, first of all, Women in Music Part 3, their last record, is to me, it's just a stone cold masterpiece. I think that is just a great record from beginning to end. So that's where I would send you. The other thing is I'm so glad you brought up the sister thing. I mean, you almost listening to them, if you didn't know, you'd say L.A. and you'd say, I bet they were in, I mean, maybe you'd have to know they were sisters, but you'd be like, they were in a family band with their parents, and they were. And the other thing I'd say is like, I don't know if either of you have ever watched live clips of them on YouTube. I mean, they're wonderful live performers. They are multi-instrumentalists. Their harmonies are incredibly tight live. They can play their music live in ways that I just have a ton of respect for. But they pull these funny rock and roll faces and poses. And so and it's nerdy in this way. Like they're nerdy. That's the thing about it. Like they're incredibly cool.
No, I've seen that before. Alana Haim will windmill, Pete Townsend style.
And just the look on their face, like it's like this rock and roll posing that you can only get away with if you're kind of still being a kid in front of a mirror in some sense. And they are still that in some really sweet way. They're insuperably cool and insuperably nerdy at the same time in ways that I find incredibly affecting.
All right. Well, the album is I Quit. The band is Haim. You should take a listen, and you'll probably be hearing more about them when we get to our Strut episode later this summer.
When you hear Lululemon, you probably think of Align yoga pants, weightlessly soft, like you're wearing next to nothing. That's why you see them in class, at the grocery store, and in the park. But did you know about skirts with built-in liner shorts so you can still jump for the Frisbee? And tanks and bodysuits? With Align's iconic stretch, you won't want to take it off. And with endless style options, you don't have to. Shop in-store or online at Lululemon.com.
I think you're on mute.
Workday starting to sound the same?
I think you're on mute.
Find something that sounds better for your career on LinkedIn. With LinkedIn Job Collections, you can browse curated collections by relevant industries and benefits, like flex PTO or hybrid workplaces, so you can find the right job for you. Get started at linkedin.com/jobs. Finding where you fit. LinkedIn knows how.
Gang, shall we endorse?
Sure. Rarely has my endorsement flowed more directly from the previous things said on the show than just now, because Steve was talking about Haim as live performers, and I wanted to endorse something that I came across in researching them, which was their Tiny Desk concert for NPR in 2020, right when that album came out, Women in Music Part 3, that you're saying was their masterpiece. So it came out in high COVID lockdown time. And so the Tiny Desk concert that they did is a Zoom concert where the screen is divided in 3. Each Haim girl is in her home playing her instrument. And as a result, it's very, very acoustic. I mean, Tiny Desk concerts always are, but it's just so boiled down. So you get that sisterly harmony that you can really, really hear without any other extra instrumentation, and just sort of see them in a very casual atmosphere. And it's only 12 minutes long, so it's not the whole album.
You end up mad at me for making a mess. I can't understand why you don't understand me, baby.
But it really did give me a sense of the charm of Haim and why people love them and how fun they would be to see live. So we'll put a link to that on the show page.
I think that's when I fell in love with them. I don't think I knew them, and that was circulating, and I watched it, and I was like, holy shit, these kids are just fucking fantastic.
Steve, what is your endorsement?
All right, a little backstory. So Factory Records, I think, is from Manchester, Mancunian record label from that heyday, is most famous, I think, for having Joy Division and New Order. But if you go on Spotify, there are a ton of Factory Record playlists that people have put together because all of these secondary, tertiary bands that Manchester, I guess probably Manchester and Manchester environs, bands that didn't really kind of make it, but share a sound and like that captures that moment of the late 70s and early 80s. Among them was this band called The Cry. Like I'd never heard of The Cry before. And I was like, oh, they're amazing. Another one of these, just a couple songs. It was like another one of these Brit sort of, Nancy Boy Brit bands from that moment. I looked them up. They're an American band from, I believe, the early 90s that landed nowhere and with nobody except with a certain Californian and maybe Pacific Northwest skater community. And for some reason, these skater kids were like, oh, The fucking Cry.
So they're kind of a New Romantics feel a little bit?
I think so. Yeah, that sounds right to me.
Like you could picture them in Victorian waistcoats or something.
I mean, you can really picture them in Manchester in like 1979, like Juan and Abandoned and making rock and roll that has that sort of like non-masculine masculinity behind it. And, maybe a little bit of like drowning in self-pity, but in kind of a wonderful way.
Is it enough now to be on your own? Is it enough now to be alone? Is it enough now to be on your own? To be on your own,
And then they somehow got rediscovered because the skater community kept them alive. And I think they reunited and made another record or at least an EP or something. So check them out. And there are a couple of bands, I think, called The Cry, or at least one other. So like the songs would be Starting Again, which I think is one of the new ones. Alone, which is one of the old ones. Alone's just an amazing song. And Truth is a good one. The old album was called Beautiful Reasons. I really, really, really dig this music. And if you're into this sort of factory aesthetic, you can like a band called The Wake, which I was unfamiliar with. It just turns out to be marvelous, have incredible songs. So check them out.
Very cool. I will check that out. My endorsement this week is that I have fallen down a deep, deep podcast hole. Like I've abandoned all my usual podcasts. I gather some things have been going on in the world, something Iran, big drama. I have only been listening to my sole source of information for like a week and a half has been the Seth Meyers and Lonely Island podcast, which is a short by short recap podcast of every short that the Lonely Island crew, which is Andy Samberg, Jorma Taccone, and Akiva Schaffer, made for SNL, and then their various other side projects, including their film Hot Rod. Why is it so good? I am interested in both comedy and the evolution of SNL, and obviously the 50th anniversary stuff this year has sort of made the history of SNL seem more interesting, at least to me. But really, the vibe is that these guys who are old friends essentially are doing a podcast so that they can hang out regularly. Like the vibe is almost the equivalent of like the way a book club can work for adult friendship, where it's like, oh, it's like a set it and forget it. And I know I'll see you guys once a month. And, so they're just having a very good time hanging out with each other. It's a consummate hang podcast. And they're a funny and erudite bunch of people. Among the recurring shticks of it is that apparently Andy Samberg is extremely good at the New York Times spelling bee and gets queen bee every day, mostly without assists. Like it's rarer for him not to, which is its own interesting fact about that quartet. And there's also just like fun little production tidbits. Seth Meyers makes great material out of being sort of the fourth wheel of this trio. It's just like an incredibly charming listen. If escaping reality is appealing to you, may I recommend the Seth Meyers Lonely Island podcast.
Wait, I just feel the need to point out as a follow-up that the man I live with also gets Queen Bee almost every day. So I'm basically Joanna Newsom, is what I'm saying.
I mean, of course, facts. Like, that's not news to me. All right. Well, you'll find links to some of the things we talked about today on our show page, slate.com/culturefest. And of course, you can always email us at culturefest@slate.com. Our production assistant is Daniel Hirsch. Our producer is Benjamin Frisch. The executive producer of Slate Podcast is Mia Lobel. For Dana Stevens and Steve Metcalf, I'm Julia Turner. Thanks so much for joining. We'll see you next week.
And our wonderful introductory music is by Nicholas Bertel.
Oh, I forgot that part. How could I do you that way, Nicholas Bertel? Yes. And that. Exactly. And I will say, I just want to shout out the listener who wrote in and was like, can you please identify the bird sound at minute whatever of the intro? And I was like, I'm not going to bother Nick Bertel with this. But then Slate Culture producer and birder, exceeding even my own birding skills, Forrest Wickman chimed in to identify it as a pheasant, thus resolving the listener's problem.
I love that email thread so much. That was so Julia and Forrest extra special edition.
Well, I was like, good luck, buddy. Try Merlin. And Forrest was like, I have identified your bird.
but Julia, you realize the whole reason Forrest is a birder is because of you. So it all comes around.
That's not true, is it?
I think so. I think he, during the pandemic, needed a hobby, wanted to start down some new mental road and have something new and exciting. And he thought birding seemed fun based on your talking about it. I think that you were very, very influential on him in terms of birds.
I think that is a false history. There are so many birding influences in the world besides me, but who knows? If so, congrats and you're welcome, Forrest. Anyway, that's the kind of extreme listener service you can get if you email us at culturefest@slate.com.
People just got a free plus. I love it.
Yeah, do you guys have any other things, random sounds you'd like us to identify? Well, that's a business line we're going into, inspired by Alex Cooper. Anyway, thank you. Good show. See you next week.